What is up, ladies and gentlemen? My name is Carl. I'm a consumer review lad, and I just consumed CSI Vegas Season 1, Episode 2, Honeymoon in Vegas, and I'm going to review it on this podcast. Last week's episode was named Legacy. I don't think I mentioned that on the podcast last week, but last week's episode was Legacy. This week, it's called Honeymoon in Vegas. We're going to start off with a real quick non-spoiler review. I just want to let everyone know I gave this episode 3 stars. Entertainment, I gave a 4. I was pretty entertained watching tonight's episode. I felt it flowed better than last week, and just overall it was just a better episode. Acting, I gave a 3. A step up from last week. No noticeable terrible acting, and basically just average acting. So step up from last week. Last week had some spots that was really bad acting. Overall, the acting was just average this episode. Story was a 2 once again. Story of this episode wasn't as rushed as last week, but just a lot of kind of happens, and I got a bit confused at parts from how they go to point A to point B. I believe they just, they pass off a lot of detail off with a line, and I really think they could maybe cut some stuff out, maybe slow it down, and just detail a little bit better how they get from point A to point B. Presentation was a 3, nothing bad nor amazing, just average presentation. If you want to know how I rate my episodes, you listen to last week's podcast. I go into detail about that. But overall, I give this episode 3 stars. Now for the spoiler parts. I'll be spoiling this episode. If you don't want to be spoiled and know what happens, don't listen anymore. So last week, there was 2 crimes that the 2 teams were investigating. One was who sent a hitman to Jim Brass, and the same person who sent a hitman to Jim Brass also kidnapped an officer. And also, who shot and killed a store employee and burned the shop down. This week, we really only had one main murder, and I guess last week we had one main murder too, since if you want to talk about that, Jim Brass storyline was one storyline and the murder was the other one, but the murder storyline last week was really rushed. This week, the murder storyline took more of the A point story in this episode, and we'll go into that one. We'll go into the main murder storyline, and it was really over who shot a bride and groom on the night before their wedding at their house. The secondary storyline was about David Hodge, so we'll start with the murder storyline. So 2 doctors were having some adult fun on the couch in their living room when someone unlocked the door and shot them. The girl survived, went to crawl to get her phone. Someone stepped on her arm and took a picture of her, and then they shot her and killed her. Josh, the dude last week who pretty much the whole episode, he was building a replica of the store, and he ended up solving the shop murder and arson based off that replica. He didn't build anything this episode, so that whole he builds stuff didn't really happen this episode. He just worked with Allie this episode, and last episode there seemed to be some sort of love story with Allie involving Josh and involving another character who wasn't in this episode. And Josh and Allie, they had a lot of tension this episode, really based off where their murder took them. Josh and Allie, they're investigating this murder, and since they found the bodies, they realize, it's their wedding day. They're getting all these text messages. So Josh and Allie, they go to the wedding, they talk to the guest. The person who killed the girl stepped on her arm, and they had to get a big size 14 shoe print, so they were looking for someone that wore some big shoes. They found a guy that wore big shoes who had a blonde wife. The blonde wife's relevant because they found a blonde hair at the scene. So they talked to the guy at the wedding, and he kind of just isn't really working with them too well, but they give up a sample and yada, yada, yada. They take that to the lab and do some tests. We go back to the crime scene, and really, with the help of some of the old school CSI cast, they find a red liquid in the garage. It belongs to an expensive vehicle. They find a shoe print with some very specific tree leaf on the print. Somehow they used this to explain where they went next. I'm not really sure at what part they took this information and went to this mansion, but somehow they went to this mansion. I literally rewinded it to see if I missed something, and I still really couldn't find it. But they took this information of the liquid, they took this information of this plant, and they went to this mansion that was having this party, and there's an expensive car there. They quickly realized that expensive car was leaking the exact same liquid, so that was a car. They go inside, there's a hostess there, and they find out real quick that this is a swinger club, and that's what it is. It's pretty much a swinger club. And they let the CSI, they kind of give the CSI guys a tour, and then they just let the CSI guys, which is just like I said, Josh and Allie, scrub the car for prints and other evidence. But then when the CSI guys wanted a list of members, they said no, and then the CSI, they're being followed by the press now because of that David Hodge story. They said, well, we'll get a warrant, we'll come back, and they'll be pressed. And they're like, all right, go ahead and, do what you gotta do. Here's a list. And the guy with the big shoe at the wedding, he's on the list. They go to his office at work. He says, yeah, they're swingers. There's nothing to hide. Why would he kill that couple over that? His secretary comes in. She has some blue stuff on her arm. There's also some blue stuff at the crime scene. She says she got it from being in a very specific room at the swinger mansion. So they go back to the swinger mansion. They are checking out the room. They noticed the paint color was off on the wall. So they had some high power light that was making the paint fade since there's no window. So they cut some cloth off this like cloth wall. They find a webcam. The swinger club hostess says the owner, was previously on a trip and now he's back, and they want to know what this webcam's connected to. Must be connected to a computer. And since he came back today and left with nothing, the computer that has all these photos should still be in the building. And they just let the CSI members just search the trash, search the place. They find a laptop. And they also find a burnt photo. They use their new CSI tech, I'm assuming it's new, to bring the pic back from the old photo. They get the picture back. It's a picture of the murder where he took a picture of the girl. It's that same picture where he took a picture of the girl right before he shot her. Laptop had records of extortion. They interview the owner of the club, thinking he did it since he had the boots using a crime. There was blood tested on the boots. Maxine, the head CSI lady, said it can't be him. He had a stroke recently. He couldn't even grip a gun. But he's hiding the stroke well. So they realize it was the hostess based off gunshot residue between nail polish on her hand. And they assume she wore the boots. Basically, they killed this couple because the couple bullied the owner to get their pics back and to stop being extorted. The couple was going to tell their friend with the big shoe size to do the same thing. So she went and killed them and took a pic to send to the friend so he'll keep paying the extortion prices. Very interesting premise for the show. It's just, I don't get how they went from the exotic card specifically to the mansion. They rush through so much. They put so much in this episode. They don't give the viewers a chance to kind of solve the crime themselves or to really look at a list of suspects. I mean, this murder versus last week's murder had more suspects you could kind of go through. The hostess, the owner, this bodyguard guy. Hostess was the one that was really, got the most time. I just think they could take some stuff out, slow it down, explain how to go from point A to point B a little bit better, and give the viewers a chance to really solve the crime a little bit better. That's my opinion. Like I said earlier, there's a slight love story going on here, basically with Allie and the Joshua character, so we'll see where that goes as the season goes on. Second storyline is David Hodge. He got arrested. He got released. He has a pregnant wife. He talks to Jim Brass, Sarah, and Gil. Sarah believes he's innocent. Brass just insults him, and Gil just trusts the evidence. Earlier in the episode, Gil is looking at the storage unit. The cops are kind of packing it up, and there's crime scene around it. He's just right outside the tape, just staring into the scene. A cop finally approaches him, asking who he is supposed to be here. He pretty much implies he's a random guy, so he goes to leave. He then tells the cop that, hey, that equipment they're looking for is so-and-so, and the cop's like, who are you? He's like, I'm just a random guy, so he leaves. Head CSI lady Maxine tells these two they can't work on the case. They have to distance themselves from it since they worked with David. Gil tells David that a lot of his personal items were in the storage unit. David said he moved recently, and a lot of his items are missing, but his moving boxes are still in the garage. Gil and Sarah decide to look at the garage and find no hint of a break-in. They talk in the kitchen, and Gil just doesn't believe David. He doesn't believe his story, and he leaves. But outside the house, when Sarah approaches him, he notices a dog is missing. There's a missing dog sign. Then somehow they find a burial plot for the dog, and there's a spider that proves how long the dog's body was there. So they dig up the dog's body, take it to the CSI lab to do some tests. Maxine lets them do it, since technically it's not the David case, and it's about animal cruelty. So the belief is someone took this neighbor of David's dog, killed the dog, buried the dog right next to where he stole the dog, broke into David's house to get the items. And that's where we leave off with the David Hodge story. This is going to be a season-long story, of course. The other storyline is just a per-episode story. Overall, like I said, this was a more entertaining episode than last week with better acting, but the storyline just isn't cutting it yet. They need to go from A to B a little bit slower, a little bit more explain to the audience how they're making these calls, how they're going to this house versus this house. Why did they go to the sex mansion? I'm not sure why they went to the sex mansion. I'm gonna be honest. I even rewinded. I don't know. Somehow, some way it was on a list, and I guess they went there because of that. And it ended up being one of the main, they ended up solving the murder because of that. And I would just try to do that. I would try to cutting some stuff out. They don't need to have all this stuff in these crimes. They can maybe cut some of it out and go a little bit slower from point A to point B so the audience can kind of follow along and know what's going on and have a chance to connect the dots instead of just showing the dots. Let the audience try to figure out the case instead of just showing what happened in the case. That's just my opinion on how they could do those mysteries. Anyways, I gave this episode 3 out of 5 stars. Again, average rating in my system is 3 to 3.5 stars, so this is about average. Last week it was 2.5 stars, it was below average. This week had better acting and I was more entertained, so that bumped it up half a star. I'd like to know what you think. Tweet me at consume_review. If this is on YouTube, leave a comment down below. If you enjoy this video podcast, click like if you're on YouTube. If not, if you didn't enjoy it, click subscribe. You might enjoy a future podcast. Anyways, my name is Carl. I'm a Consumer Review Lad. This has been the Consumer Review Podcast for CSI Vegas, Season 1, Episode 2, Honeymoon in Vegas. Peace out.